Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, otherwise known as the Alter Rebbe, was one of the most important figures in all of contemporary Judaism. His works and ideals basically define much of Jewish thought and philosophy to this day, and on top of that, he lived a pretty tumultuous life, getting tossed in prison a few times for his ideals, dealing with some of the local Russian czars, and at some point having conflict with the Emperor Napoleon. So, with that enough as an intro, let's go over the life of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe. Rabbi Shneur Zalman was born in Liadi, around Vitebsk, near the town of Lubavitch in 1745, to a man named Rabbi Baruch, a direct descendant of the Maharal of Prague. It was immediately clear to everybody around him that this was a particularly unique child. In his formative years, even before the age of 12, he had entirely mastered all areas of Judaic law, from the Talmud to all contemporary halacha, towards more esoteric areas of Jewish faith, Kabbalah, and of course in the fields of mathematics and science, to such an extent that his teacher, one of the most famed sages in the entire region, approached Shneur Zalman's father and informed him that he could no longer teach the boy, as he had grown beyond him in knowledge. So the boy was sent to the schools in nearby Vitebsk and was seen as an equal to the others who studied there, many almost double or perhaps more his age. Eventually, after many teenage years of study and learning, he got married at the age of 20 and decided to learn beneath the tutelage of the famed Maggid of the city of Mezritch, Rabbi Dovber, the student of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the former of the entire Hasidic movement, one of the larger sects of Judaism to this day. Interestingly, this was actually a bit of a decision for him. He decided against going to the schools of another great sage of the time, the Vilna Gaon, a renowned master of Talmudic knowledge and a wise and righteous man, but he decided to learn beneath Rabbi Dovber of Mezritch, as his teachings prioritize the importance and significance of prayer, something which was and would become particularly important to him and eventually his entire sect. So he traveled all the way, paying for his journey by working odd jobs, whether in farming in fields or cutting trees in forests, until he inevitably arrived in the city of Mezritch. There he spent many years learning with that sage, becoming an expert in all of the more spiritual aspects of Judaism, particularly in Hasidic Kabbalism. But that's not to say he left aside the more practical aspects of Judaic law. He literally rewrote and recodified the entire series of books of practical Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, which had been created about 200 years previously, to the point where his version is the primary source used by many Jewish people to this day. There was, however, some conflict in this time. Some particular sects of Jews were actually very against the spreading and propagation of Hasidic ideals, believing it wasn't something that should be given to the less knowledgeable or less literate peoples of the world, and should instead remain as a scholarly pursuit for only the most lofty of sages alone. It actually became a whole entire debate, with many opposing this for the above reasons, citing claims that if all of this information was disseminated by the higher-ups who had it, it would be misunderstood or underappreciated or disregarded, while many on the opposite side, under the leadership of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, argued it would be best if freely given to all people, irregardless of their level, as he believed that the information was simply too important to not disseminate. This thought process, along with the actual beliefs taught in Hasidic philosophy, along with the ideals, became the central beliefs and ideals of Chabad Hasidus, Chabad being an acronym for the three Hebrew words for wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. As an aside, he also worked hard to assist all of everybody living around him in all areas, helping poor people acquire farmland, sending money as charity to the poor in Israel, and financially assisting any and everybody near himself, whatever their circumstance. Over a time, he amassed a pretty significant following, thousands studying beneath him as their spiritual leader and rabbi. However, in the meanwhile, those that opposed his beliefs decided to try and do something about it. So, as Russia, where they all lived, were actively at war with Turkey's Ottoman Empire in the meanwhile of this time, which was about the late 1700s, so these men forged documents that the charity money Rabbi Shneur Zalman was sending to Israel was actually being sent to the country's enemies in Turkey. So, their ploy worked, and the Russian Tsarist government branded him a heretic and traitor and arrested him. He was imprisoned in St. Petersburg for a period before facing trial, where he argued his case, even to the point where Tsar Paul I visited him incognito in his cell, along with, at other times, other men of high military or social station, and spoke to him, having interesting religious and philosophical debates. Eventually, after a while, the charges were all cleared, and on the 19th of the Hebrew month of Kislev, which is actually in a few days from now, from whenever I post this video, he was freed from prison under the express order of the Tsar. In fact, this date of the 19th of Kislev is something of a mini holiday for many Jewish people, particularly Chabad Hasidim around the world. In fact, literally the same exact thing happened again, like nearly 2 years later, with him being arrested under similar false charges and being released, this time under the approval of Tsar Alexander I. However, all throughout, he stood firm in support for his country's government, even when war broke out with Napoleon. In the meanwhile, as all of this prior stuff had been going on, the French Revolution had taken place, and in its aftermath, Napoleon had seized power, and after being named emperor, started a campaign across many other countries to further extend his reach, eventually culminating in him attacking Russia and its Tsarist leadership. They pushed their way inward, but the Russian forces refused to give, and eventually, although he seized Moscow itself, it was burnt down and there were hundreds of thousands of casualties. During all this, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, as he was at this point called, remained a staunch ally of his country, even to the point of arranging with some of his close friends to be spies over Napoleon's forces, one of which did some sizable work in regards to damaging some storehouses and warehouses of Napoleon's supplies. The principal reason he decided to side with Russia as opposed to Napoleon in this conflict is a pretty complex subject, but it largely boils down to the fact that while Napoleon's country would technically be safer for the Jewish population, it would be a secular country with a quashing of any religious ideals, which he of course deemed unacceptable, and figured it would be better for things to remain as they were, although it wasn't really that great, but you know. As time went on, eventually the Napoleonic forces were pushed all the way back, made an effort into Spain, then lost pretty handily at the Battle of Waterloo, and so Napoleon was banished. However, all the dealing with this conflict had taken a severe toll on the Alter Rebbe, and the constant fleeing town to town with the advancing French forces were pretty bad for, at this point, an older person like him, and he passed away in 1812 and was buried in a small village called Haditz. However, there was his life's work, which he left after him, a book called the Tanya. It's a book which basically contains all of the basic and primary ideals that he expressed as so important back in that philosophical debate over the spreading of Hasidic philosophy he had had with all of the other prominent members of the Jewish communities a few decades earlier, ideas whose propagation had gotten him thrown into prison for a period. Right after he was freed, he took this as a sign to resume his work forthright, and soon after penned this book, which, as mentioned, is basically a very detailed summary of some of the most important and fundamental ideals in Hasidic philosophy, touching on topics like the purpose of man in this world, the nature of the soul, connection to God, and many others. It's split into 5 parts, and it's a book of such importance that you could reasonably say that it is the most important book in basically all of contemporary Jewish scripture. But yeah, his ideals and teachings would be continued, him being the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, all the way down to the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, who might be a bit more recognizable, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, otherwise known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, although, yeah, he is, like, the 7th, so he continued in this light for many generations after. So yeah, that's a pretty rough summary of the story and life of the Alter Rebbe. Hope you enjoyed the video, maybe learned something new, and with that said, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.